speaker comes to us from a place that I also call home, San Francisco Bay Area. Eric Snowden manages a multidisciplinary team of designers responsible for the Adobe Creative Cloud and Adobe Document Cloud applications and services at Adobe. So I asked Jay yesterday about the first time he heard Eric speak. And he said it was actually a very memorable moment because of a misunderstanding. It was a few years back, apparently during a time when another guy named Snowden was in the news. And there were, I guess Eric was doing a presentation at a design conference, and some of the people in the audience thought maybe this other Snowden would be speaking. They were in for a surprise, but it was a pleasant surprise because of what they learned from Eric. So today we get to hear about Eric's journey in design leadership, as well as his wisdom for designing a healthy team. Please join me in welcoming Eric Snowden to the stage.
Such a dramatic opening. Hope I can live up to that. Thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be back at DesignUp and to Singapore for the very first time. And so we just heard two really awesome talks about the future of design and maybe a little bit of a dystopian future at moments. And maybe I'm here to talk about the dystopian present of design. I'm going to talk about design management, leadership, and teams, more specifically how design teams are run. And so I'm Eric. I help people at Adobe make their best work. I've got a background in illustration, graphic design, product design. I've done teaching, I've done advertising, I've done lots of different things, and I've been at Adobe for the last 5 years. Before I was at Adobe, I managed teams at Behance. I was one of the original members of that team. I was VP of product for Atlantic Records. I worked at Warner Music Group as a creative director, and I taught at Parsons in New York. And so now I'm part of Adobe Design, which is a big centralized design organization within Adobe. We do all the product design for Adobe's 3 clouds. So there's Creative Cloud, which most of you obviously know, Document Cloud, which is PDF services, and Experience Cloud. And I oversee design for 2 of those 3 product divisions. This is actually what our portfolio looks like. There's more stuff here than you probably all thought. We make a lot of things. We have 50 plus products across mobile, web, desktop, all the way from individuals up to enterprises. It's a pretty big team and a very complex way of working. But this is the question I want to talk about today. So how can an industry that's so empathetic with its customers treat each other so poorly? And what do I mean by that? And so I want to start out talking about, some of you have horrible, I can tell. I know who you are now, I won't tell. And so we've all been in situations where we have bad bosses, we're in bad situations, we have difficult teams to work with. And I want to talk a little bit more about a couple of real situations here that have started to craft who I would later become as a design manager and a design leader. So this is a quote that one of my friends at a company I used to work at said in my first week or 2 on my job there. So it was the first time I was managing a big team. I was presenting in front of a large audience for the first time. And this was what I was told. A little bit of an intimidating place. I was told by my direct manager at the time that I would never be a good manager because I didn't yell at people. And I asked, I was like, my team is always delivering on time. Everyone is happy. We're under budget. What is that going to get me? And the answer was basically, no one will respect you unless you're able to sort of yell and command the room. And so pretty early on, I realized the kind of manager I didn't want to be. This is a quote about someone who reported to me earlier in my career. And I think this is something you see a lot with young design managers and young engineering managers. You've worked your entire career to get good at a craft. And then you get a new job, and that craft is not how you're judged anymore. You're judged by a completely new set of things, which may be completely unclear to you. And your impulse is to actually snap back to the thing you've been known for and to use that as a way to solve problems. And so designers and design managers jumping in and doing work for other designers, redoing people's work, sort of taking control of the situation by using the skills they have. And it almost seems like a good thing on paper. They're trying to help out, but it's massively demoralizing to teams. Don't do this. Don't let people do this to you. This was a quote about a designer referring to a PM they worked for. We've probably seen managers like this who, it's almost like hoarding information is their value, right? They try to keep everything to themselves. They don't share that value with the rest of the team. And this allows them to seem very important, but it doesn't allow the teams to become self-sufficient, right? You can't do work without information. That's a core part of design, and it's impossible to grow under a manager like this. Don't be this person either. And so the last example I have is sort of the traditional micromanager. And this is really important because good, smart, capable people are being driven out of the design industry by people like this. This is a friend at actually her current job, which hopefully she won't be at for very much longer. You have to assume good intent. You have to trust the people you hire. That is the only way you can scale and the only way you can create good work. So what are we going to do? Whether you're a manager, whether you're an individual contributor, you're running your own company, you want to be a manager in the future, I think there's hopefully some things you can learn from this presentation to take with you and start doing today, tomorrow, like right away. So I want to talk about 5 things that you should stop doing today if you're a manager, or if you become a manager, never do these things. So I want to talk about the candidate gauntlet. So I don't know if any of you have interviewed for a design job recently, and I know this is a problem in the States and specifically in Silicon Valley. I'm assuming it's beyond that. But we treat people interviewing for jobs horribly in our industry. So the first thing that we do, and I don't know if any of you experienced this, there's this, I saw some smiles. There's this idea of a take-home design test. So as a designer, to prove your worth in interviewing at this company, you're given a test. Sometimes it's related to what people are actually doing at that company. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's paid. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're allowed to choose the amount of time you spend on it. Sometimes you're not. And we create this environment where it makes hiring managers feel really good about themselves, because it feels like you're able to judge people against each other. You can give a bunch of candidates the same task. But it's actually really destructive to candidates. It limits the kind of people who can apply for jobs. So if you're a single parent, if you are taking care of elderly family, if you're the kind of person who just needs time at night to do something else, all of these people are being disqualified by having to go through these design tests. And it's totally unreasonable. It takes the company's power dynamic and really abuses candidates for the benefit of the hiring manager. And every person I've ever had to fire has taken the test. It doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. It tests for the wrong things. Move forward or move on. So when you're hiring, make a decision. One of my favorite stories, I was working in advertising in New York, and I left my current job. I was applying for new jobs. There was a company I really wanted to work for. They had this amazing client, and I never heard back from them. And I took another job. It was actually my job at Warner Music Group. And 6 months later, I got a phone call saying, "Congratulations, you got the job." I'm like, "I've been at my new job for 5 months. Like, what did you think I was doing?" And I just, during that time, I never heard anything from them. And so if you're it's like dating or any other sort of relationship. Like, you have to keep talking to people. You have to be honest with people and move on. It's crazy to think that people are just sitting around waiting for you. Rethink your requirements. A lot of companies are trying to lift hard college degree requirements because some of the greatest minds of the last couple generations never finished college. I've hired lawyers who are amazing problem solvers. Some of the best design systems designers I've ever worked with are former engineers. One of my best designers at Adobe was a quality assurance engineer in his first job at Adobe. And he was doing QE work for design and eventually started looking at things saying, I think I can make a better experience than this. And he was right. And so, a lot of hiring managers put an insane number of skills in a job requirement because, it's to protect themselves. It's like, well, if I can find someone who can do all of these things, nothing bad can happen. I've hired a good candidate, right? And that's just, it's not true. And again, it is limiting to the kinds of people you'll get applying for jobs if you do these things. And watch your language. What I mean by that, how many of you have seen job postings that have words like this in it? And this is not one job posting. I've still never seen an obsessed unicorn ninja rockstar designer, but it's coming, and please nobody do this. And so we put these words out there like obsessed, like what a horrible quality to actually look for in a person. It's really toxic. It says that you only want to hire people where their work is the only thing about them that matters, and they will give everything to you as a company, and it gives you the right, or not the right, it basically gives you license to treat them like crap, and that's what a lot of companies do. It is not a badge of honor to never take vacation. It is not a badge of honor to never spend time with your family. And perspective leads to better decisions. Like, I'm excited about all the things I've had time to think about being in Singapore for a few days, going back home and enacting some of these new ideas. So really important. So the second thing we should stop doing today is assuming incompetence. And what do I say when I mean that? It seems like in our industry, there's almost like a one strike rule for a lot of people. And so whenever someone isn't living up to what I think they should be doing in their job, my first question I always ask is, did I set them up to be successful? Did their manager set them up to be successful? Did I do my job so they can do their job? And so were they given a crazy deadline that no one could ever meet? Do they have difficult people to work with? Are they sick? Do they have sick family members? Like, what is going on in their lives without prying too much? So you can find out like why things aren't going well. And none of the questions I ask are, is this person a bad designer, right? Like that is 57th on a long list of things you need to look for. And so stop immediately assuming people aren't good at their jobs and find out why they're not able to do what we're asking them to do. The third thing is complaining down, and this is specifically for managers, but I think it's actually good advice for everyone. If you do have to complain, you should always do it to someone who has the ability to make things better. Otherwise, you're just taking the things that you feel and you're burdening other people with them. And so if a designer complains to another designer, they're just taking the fact that they feel anxious and spreading their anxiety to as many people as possible, right? Talk to your manager, talk to the people above you, and don't just complain, actually come up with solutions, even if they're bad ideas. Design is problem solving, and organizational problems are no different than product problems. And this is not hierarchical. Complain to or talk to anyone you can, because if you're just complaining about something and not solving it, that's gossip. That's not actionable, and nothing will change. Managing versus leading, and maybe I should say, again, going back to the micromanaging point, there's a senior director of design named Phil Clevenger at Adobe, and he calls these people, managers who force their designers to do a specific thing. They call them pixel fingers, because it's basically like you're taking your brain and you're turning everyone into the Borg and having them make what you want. And the best designers I've hired always complete a task better than I would have. They're spending more time on it. They're closer to it. They're just more deeply involved. And so this idea that you can sort of closely manage and control a team of people is super destructive. But you see people doing this all the time. And leaders, they focus on the big picture. They try to set up the team so they can be successful, point them in a direction, and let the team execute. Really important differences. I found a quote that is the most time someone says idiot in a quote ever, I'm pretty sure. And so that's why I like this one. But it sends a message to people that they are idiots. And as long as you think they're idiots, they will be idiots. In fact, you're making them idiots. The people that go out and make you money, you think they're idiots. Why do you keep them if they're idiots, right? And I know it's sort of a perfect quote. And I've had so many managers in the past I want to ask this question too. So treat people like human beings. Trust them to come into work on time. If they have to leave in the afternoon, don't ask where they're going. If they're getting their work done, that's the only thing that matters. And communicate intent and let people figure out what to do on their own. Without that, people cannot make decisions when you're not around, right? You cannot scale, you cannot create a great environment if no one can make a decision without you. And stop hiring from a checklist. People are more than their resume or their portfolio. You want people who have the right attitude. You want people who are ethical, who believe in the same mission as you. You want people who are constantly learning, people who are reading, people who are inquisitive. You're hiring for potential. Obviously you can look at past work for some value there, but I think the best people I've ever hired were people that were non-obvious hires. They were people that I knew were going to work hard, to get better, to learn, and that is way more important than having someone who's done the exact same job before. Like, the best hiring managers are hiring for potential. That kind of says it all, I'm pretty sure. There's this idea that, especially in design and engineering, you can find these wonderful geniuses who are horrible people to work with, but somehow, like, the great work they create outweighs their attitude. And I've never found that to be true. No one is worth that. And again, you're just taking the things that are bad about that person and spreading it out to the rest of your team. Don't let this happen at the place you work. So again, here's our 5 things we should all try to stop doing today, or again, future managers out there, don't do these things. So this is like the upswing. This is where we get a little more positive. Here's some things to start doing today. Here's how to look out for your team. And here's how to make things better as we go forward and take action. So if there's more than one person on your team, build a career ladder. And what I mean by that, it can be very simple. Write down what you're doing and write down what that person is doing and how they're different. That's all you need to do. If there's more than one person, do this. Now, the career ladder at Adobe is a little different. This is going to scroll for a minute. We have lots of different kinds of jobs, and not everyone needs something like this. I think the things to take away are be cognizant of this, like spend time on it. And I think one of the best things that Adobe does is we have 2 different career tracks. There's a principal track, which means you have nobody that reports to you, but you can still move up in the company and get raises and have more responsibility. And there's a manager track where you become a manager. And I think, again, that's something that only works at bigger companies in a lot of ways, but it's incredibly important, this idea that to have a better career, you need to become a manager. That's why we have so many horrible bosses. And without something like this, I'm sure all of you in the past have asked, like, what do I need to do to get promoted? What do I need to do to get to the next level? And a lot of times the answer is just keep doing what you're doing, right? Like, that means that person has no idea what to tell you, right? They don't know what you need to do differently. And that's sort of a horrible way. So if you set common expectations, at Adobe, if you want to get promoted, we go to the job ladder, we look at the next role, we talk about what you're doing and what's in the job requirement, how they're different. It's a very logical way to move people forward in their career. Audit key talent, and what I mean by that is we have a very simple form, and I wish this was a better resolution, but someone's name, the product they're on, their strength, areas of development, aspiration, like what do they want to do, their risk for leaving, and when they were last promoted. And we keep this up to date for every single person in our department. And quarterly, we review this with design leadership. Again, at a smaller company, even if it's a few people, keeping track of all of them, reviewing this with your head of product or CEO or whatever that looks like. Because if you're not actively managing someone's career, they're going to leave. Period. Ask for feedback on yourself. This is a super fun one that anyone can do. Ask these 4 questions next time you meet with your boss. Like, when was the last time I frustrated you? When did I last make your job easier and harder? And when didn't you feel listened to? Ask that of the people you work for and the people that work for you. Ask it of your peers. You'll learn a lot. You'll learn one of 2 things. Either you'll learn what people really think, and that's really great, because that's the only way you can get better. It's a critique. Or no one will say anything, and you realize that you're in an environment where people won't give honest feedback. And those are both important things to know, even if one of them is a little bit worrisome. And now I'm going the wrong direction. There we go. Choose non-scalable things. And what I mean by that is choose a few non-scalable things. So I'll have lunches with people on the team that don't report to me. I'll ask for coffee or dinner with executives at the company. I carve off time on a regular basis to talk to customers on Twitter, whether they're having a good time or a bad time. At Behance, when I started there, the first week you were there, you had to answer customer support calls, like on the phone. And so there are things that you can do to invest in the people around you, in your company, and understanding the problems your product has. And none of these have to be your job. I think that's another misconception, is like, oh, someone else is doing that. Like, get invested, carve out half an hour a day, a couple hours a week, and do some of these things. And for me, a lot of that has to do with meeting with people on my team, because if I can convince a smart person to come work at Adobe or convince a smart person to not leave Adobe, like what an awesome use of my time. Like there's nothing better I'm gonna do in a short period of time than hiring or keeping a really great person at this company. And define your team values. This is a quote I love from Don Dixon. And so it's really focused on the human part of running a company, team building, creating a culture that allows for individuality and freedom, but is still cohesive. This is a perfect quote, as much as you can get in that many characters, I think, about leadership. And if you don't do this, your culture will be created in the absence of doing this. And again, these are things that even small teams can do. So, in my team, especially around Creative Cloud at Adobe, there are sort of three key areas that we talk about: transparency, collaboration, and innovation. Those are three super important things for us. I don't have time to go into all these, but there's actually a new blog post on adobe.com that talks about some of these things and how we run the team. So these are things you should start doing today. So build a career ladder. Again, even if that means two people just writing down what they do and what the other person does, it's a super helpful exercise. Audit your talent. So even at a small company, make sure that you're writing down what are people doing, what are they not doing, what do they want to do, when were they last promoted. Have those conversations with people. Ask for feedback on yourself. Again, that's something that anybody can do. Choose a few things that aren't your job that will make you better at your job, and just carve off a little bit of time and do them. And again, my favorite one of those is just going on Twitter and talking to people about the stuff we make. And then define your team values, because they will exist whether you define them or not. And so I'm going to go really quickly through the end of this, but just a couple pieces of advice. And I say mileage may vary at the bottom, right? We're all at different levels in different countries with different opportunities, and I understand all that. And so I'm always hesitant to give advice because it's usually not very transferable, but I'm hoping these are broad enough and helpful enough that they will matter to you even if we aren't in the same circumstances or have the same opportunities. So hiring is your most important job. And again, I'm not just talking to managers. When a young or designer at my company will send me resumes of people he or she wish they worked with, that's the greatest thing ever, right? Get involved. This is not the CEO's job. This is not the product manager's job. This is not the design manager's job. It is everybody's job to make sure that good people work where you work, and it will make your life a lot better to do this. Treat people like humans, and this is why do I have to say this? I do, because people don't, right? And so I think one of the most common things I see, a huge mistake that bosses make, they treat employees differently than they would treat people in their life because they're in charge of their paycheck. What's a good example of that? So you regularly hear at work a boss compare one employee to another. Think about what would happen if you compared your husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever the situation is to someone you've dated in the past. Or if you compared your parents to each other, or your parents to your in-laws, or you compared your children to each other, how would that go? Why is that not acceptable behavior in your day-to-day life, but somehow becomes acceptable when you're in charge of someone's livelihood? It's not. And there are times where you have to have hard conversations, but if you ever have to say, do this because I'm the boss, you failed at some point during that conversation. There's only two ways in a company you can say you care about something. You give your time or you give money. That's it, nothing else. So if someone's oh yeah, we'll take care of that, and nothing ever happens, they don't care about it, right? These are the only two ways to show you care. And so again, invest in solving a hard problem, even if it's not yours. Talk to customers, talk to someone who's having a hard time at work. These are the only two things that you can control. This is the most important thing, and this is something I tell all new managers on my team. You were a bad designer when you started, you were a bad engineer when you started, every product manager you worked with was bad when they started. That's not the important part. It's, and again, going back to being a designer and then becoming a design manager, this idea that you're going to all of a sudden be as good at something new as you were at the thing you worked at for the last however many years to become, is just setting yourself up to feel bad and to fail, right? It's okay to suck. And I think as long as you do the second thing, spend the rest of your career trying to get better, you're moving in the right direction. And so hopefully I've given you all some ideas, whether you're, again, a designer, a design manager, work at a company with more than one person, hopefully something in here has resonated with you. Thank you for your time.
I was frantically taking notes backstage because I personally don't want to be a horrible boss.
Yes.
But thank you for telling me it's okay to suck.
Yes.
I will keep
not
working
you
on it.
specifically, I meant for
Oh, okay,
everyone.
okay. Well, my team's here. They can tell me. I took a picture of the slide about how to ask for feedback. Guess what you're getting later today. Okay, so a lot of the questions are actually about hiring.
Yep.
So the immediate question that has jumped to the very top is the very first question was, what is the alternative to a take-home test?
That's a good question. So I think there are a few. If you feel the need to do a test like that, there's something that I've seen work a lot better. Do it in the office on work time box it, make it a whiteboarding test, and have the person do it with your team, and don't tell your team what the exercise is going to be. So put everyone on an even playing field, have it be something that none of them know anything about, and run it like a workshop. Don't, like the problems I see with sort of the in-house tests tend to be, there's 5 designers at the table who've done this. This is their 37th time going through this with a candidate and a candidate who's never done it before. Like invent a new test, and that takes a little bit of work, but do the work, don't put the work on the people you're trying to hire.
Okay, thanks. This is actually the most popular one, so I'm just gonna go there. What is the most hilariously absurd designer interview question you have faced or heard?
Oh my God. That's a great one. Yeah, honestly, like, it's one of those that I should have so many answers for that I have a hard time coming up with just one. It's less of a question and maybe it's more of a practice. And so when I was interviewing for a job in the music industry, my very first interview, I hadn't talked to a human being yet, was in a room I had 10 people around the table with me and 10 people on the phone from different parts of the world, all just shooting questions at me for like an hour. And I ended up getting the job. I don't know, I blacked out, I woke up, I had the job, I don't know how it happened. But it's one of those situations where I'm like, why would you do that to someone, right? And so when we interview people, especially when I interview people, I always make sure that the first encounter is one-on-one with an actual other human being. I think that's incredibly important. So I'll think about that out. I might tweet out some better answers to that because I've heard some crazy things.
Yeah, I would agree. The interview experience is the first example of your work, your employee experience, right?
It is part of your brand. It is part of your brand. People don't think about it that way. The people you hire or you don't hire will go and talk about the experience they had with your company in the same way they will talk about your product. You have to treat it like you would a product. It can't be this sort of side thing that you're doing.
All right, thanks. Okay, it's easier to hire for similar types of people as you. How do you hire differently? And how can you tell if different is just uncomfortable yet competent or someone who's just not right?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, yes, it is very easy to hire people like you, and that's how we run into a lot of the problems that some of the other speakers were talking about. You get 20 people in the room that all have the same background and the same beliefs and the same ideas, and they come up with the same solutions. And so I think first off is just acknowledging the fact that diversity leads to stronger teams and being sort of aware of that. And again, some of the things I talked about earlier, things think about your hiring process and when you're weeding out people that are different to you, right? So think about things again, the take-home design requirement. I've talked to people who have kids, they can't or aren't willing to do that, and either one is an okay answer, right? You think about those job requirements. We know that men are more likely to apply to a job that has crazy requirements they're not qualified for women. So all those obsessed ninja rock star ones, you're weeding out half the population by doing that. There are a lot of things that you're doing during that process that you're not even seeing great candidates. The college requirement one is another great one, right? If you think of Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, you can name all of these people who didn't complete college, but somehow that was the wrong way, and finding someone who has to have a specific degree is the right way. And so I think it starts with the top of the funnel, just like a lot of design problems, and not limiting it to people. Like a lot of your job posting and interview process can increase bias and actually limit the number of people you're getting. Like start at the top of the funnel.
All right, great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your tips. I think that's going to be our last question. There are a lot more questions, by the way, so I'll encourage you to look at the vision hole. And
cool.
You guys find them at the break. So my last question about your tips is, there are probably plenty of people in this audience who are not managers. And per your two-track system at Adobe and at other companies, not everybody will become a manager. So how can your tips apply to them?
Well, I'm hoping that a lot of these things are things that you can do whether you're a manager or not, or at least look out for. I think at Adobe, even non-managers are helping to post and sort of amplify job postings, right? And if you see a job posting that has some of the language or requirements I talked about, like mention it to your manager saying, like, I'm worried that we're limiting the kinds of candidates we're getting because of the way we're talking about our job. Write a new post and show it to them. Have that conversation, right? And I think when it comes to any of these things, like there are difficult parts to any company. But when I look at how good a manager, how good a company is, rate of change is actually more important than where you are today. And so if you start having these conversations, even at the individual contributor level, and things start to change, you're at a good company. And if you're unable to make things change by having these conversations, that doesn't mean you're at a bad company, but it means you're at a company and it's going to be the same way a year from now, 5 years from now, and you have to decide if that's the right thing for you or not. And so I think things like getting feedback from peers around you, from interacting more directly with customers, even if that's not explicitly your job, assuming that you're allowed to do that in the job you're in. There are lots of things you can do to start to bridge these gaps without having to actually be a manager, and maybe recommending some of these things to people you work with if they're open to that.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Kuhn.